The last thing anyone heard from Ranger Cole Whitfield was 11 words. He said them slow, like he was reading them off a wall in the dark. Then the radio dropped into static, and it stayed that way for the next 19 hours. It was the 4th of November when the call first came in. A deer hunter named Martin Reese had not come home the night before. His truck was still sitting at the trailhead off an old forest road in the Missouri Ozarks, parked under a stretch of ridge the locals had a name for but never wrote down on any map. Reese was 51 years old. He had hunted that country his entire life. He was not the kind of man who wandered off and got himself turned around in the dark. So the county did what counties do. They sent a ranger. And the ranger they sent was Cole Whitfield, a man with 22 years in those hills, a man who knew every hollow and every creek bed and every game trail between the highway and the river. If anyone could walk into that country and walk back out with Martin Reese, it was him. He walked in at first light. He did not walk back out. What you are about to hear is built from his radio logs from the dispatch recordings the county was required to keep, and from the notes he left in a field book that a search team found 3 days later, wedged into the fork of a tree, 40 feet off the ground, where no man should have been able to reach. Some of it makes sense, some of it does not. And the part in the middle, the part where his voice changes, is the reason this story never made the news. Because Cole Whitfield did not just find a missing hunter out there. He found something that, according to every map, every survey, and every record the state of Missouri has ever kept, was never supposed to exist. To understand what happened on that ridge, you have to understand the ridge itself. The Ozarks are old. Not old the way a building is old the way the ground is old. This is some of the most ancient exposed rock on the whole continent, worn down over a stretch of time the human mind cannot really hold. And people have lived in these hills for a very, very long time. Longer, some would argue, than the official history wants to admit. Ask anyone who grew up in that part of the state and they will tell you the hills are full of things that do not belong. Cut stone in places no wagon could ever have reached. Foundations in the middle of the forest with no road leading to them and no record of who built them. Straight walls, squared corners, worked rock, sitting under 100 years of leaf litter. In country the history books swear was empty wilderness until the settlers came. The official answer is always the same. Old homesteads, forgotten cabins, nothing to see. But the people who actually walk these woods, the hunters and the trappers and the rangers, they carry a different feeling about it. They will tell you quietly that some of that stone is older than any homestead, that some of it is cut too clean and set too heavy, that the forest in certain places grew up over something that was already there and already finished long before anyone thought to write a single word about it. The old-timers had a rule about that ridge, and it was a simple one. You hunted the lower slopes, you worked the creek bottoms, and when the ground started to climb toward that shelf of broken stone near the crest, you turned around and went home. No one really knew. Martin Reese knew the stories. Cole Whitfield knew them better. And on the morning of the 5th of November, Whitfield keyed his radio, told dispatch he had cut Reese's boot tracks near the base of the ridge, and started climbing toward the one part of that country the old-timers always told you to leave alone. Dispatch logged the time, 7:41 in the morning. His voice was calm. That was the last time he sounded like himself. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of what the ranger found before his radio went dark. The county survey maps that were quietly pulled from the public record, the ranger's own handwritten field notes, and the full radio transcript, time-stamped and word for word. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The first 2 hours were routine. Whitfield followed the tracks up the slope, calling in his position every 20 minutes the way protocol required. Reese's trail was easy at first, a boot print in the soft ground, a broken branch, the small signs a man leaves without meaning to. And they led straight up toward the ridge, steady and deliberate, like Reese had been walking to something rather than wandering away from something. Then, around 10 in the morning, the tracks changed. Whitfield reported it flat and factual, the way a trained man reports a thing he does not yet understand. Reese's stride, he said, had gotten longer, much longer. The gap between the prints had opened up to something no man that age could cover at a walk, and they were deeper on the toe, like Reese had been moving fast. Running, maybe. Uphill, toward the top. A man does not run uphill through Ozark brush unless something is behind him, or unless something is calling him. Whitfield kept climbing. At 10:40 he called in the first thing that did not fit. He had reached a bench of flat ground just under the crest of the ridge, a natural shelf in the rock. And on that shelf, half swallowed by the trees, he found a wall, not a fence, not a fallen tree. A wall. Cut stone, he said. Squared blocks, set without mortar, each one bigger than a man could lift, fitted together so tight he could not slide the blade of his knife between them. It ran along the bench for a distance he could not see the end of, and it stood taller than his head. And it was old, not old like a barn, old like the rock around it. There was nothing about a wall on that ridge in any file the county had. No survey mentioned it, no map marked it. In 22 years of walking that country, Cole Whitfield had never seen it, never heard of it, never had a reason to climb that particular shelf of stone. It should not have been there, but it was, and Reese's tracks ran straight along the base of it, toward a gap where the blocks opened up. Dispatch asked him to confirm. He confirmed. Then he went quiet for a long stretch. When he came back on, his voice had changed. Not scared, not yet, just careful. He said the gap in the wall was not a gap, it was a doorway. A worked opening with a lintel stone across the top, a single slab so large he could not imagine how it had ever been lifted into place. And through the doorway there was no building, no room, no structure of any kind, just the forest continuing on the other side, exactly the same as this side, as if the wall and the door were all that had ever been built, or all that was left. And Reese's tracks went through it. Whitfield stood at that doorway for a long time. You can hear it in the log, the gaps between his transmissions getting longer. Then he said the line the search coordinator would later refuse to put in the official report. He said, and I am quoting the recording here, "The stone is too square, the corners are wrong. Nobody built this to be looked at. They built it to be sealed." Then he stepped through the doorway to follow the tracks. Dispatch tried to talk him out of it. You can hear the operator's voice on the recording telling him to hold his position, telling him a second team was already staging at the trailhead and would reach him within the hour. Whitfield acknowledged the message. He said he understood. And then he went in anyway because Reese's tracks went in, and a man does not leave a hunter on the wrong side of a door he cannot explain. For a while after that, the transmissions came steady again, and for a while everything he described was almost ordinary. Trees, rock, the tracks still running ahead of him, still too long, still too fast. He said the light felt wrong past the wall, dimmer than it should have been for midday, but he put that down to the canopy. He said the air was dead still, no birds, no wind, no insects. He noted it the way he noted everything, and he kept walking. And every few minutes he called his heading back to dispatch, and every few minutes the operator answered him. Until the moment the answer stopped and all Whitfield had left was the sound of his own voice going out into a country that did not send anything back. Then he found Reese's rifle. It was lying in the leaves, he said, maybe 100 yards past the doorway, still loaded, safety off. And the strap was snapped clean, not worn through, not cut, snapped, like it had been torn off the man while he was still holding it. There was no blood on the rifle, and none in the leaves around it, which somehow sat worse with him than blood would have. A man loses his weapon in a struggle. He doesn't lose it clean, mid-stride, strap torn, without a single drop of blood spilled anywhere near it. Whitfield picked it up, cleared it, and set it against a tree where the search team could find it later. Then he did the thing that saved this story. He stopped talking to dispatch, opened his field book, and started writing down what he was seeing, word for word, because some part of him had already decided the radio was not going to make it out of there. And what he wrote in that field book in the 10 pages before his handwriting falls apart is the part that changes everything. Before we move on to what happened past the doorway, stop for a second. What you just heard about the wall on the ridge is the part that changes everything, but it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original dispatch log. The stone that was too square, the door with no building, it's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The field book picks up where the radio started to fail. The first pages are steady. His handwriting is neat, controlled, the writing of a man forcing himself to stay calm by focusing on detail. And the detail is what makes it terrible. He wrote that past the wall, the forest was not really forest. The trees, he said, were growing in rows. Not the loose scatter of a natural wood, but rows evenly spaced, curving away in long lines, like the columns of something that had once had a roof. He wrote that the ground under the leaves was flat, too flat, and when he cleared a patch of it with his boot, he found more stone. Not scattered rock, a floor, cut and fitted and laid, running on in every direction, under all of it, under the whole hillside, with the forest simply grown up on top, like moss on a grave. He had not walked into the woods. He had walked into a ruin the size of a town, and the woods were only what had come after. He kept his notes anyway. That is the thing that stays with you about Cole Whitfield. A trained man alone standing inside something that should not exist, and his first instinct was to measure it. He paced off the distances. He counted the rows of trees and the courses of stone. He wrote that the blocks in the lower walls were larger than the ones above them, the way a thing is built when the people building it still had the means to move mere impossible weight, and were slowly losing it. He wrote that nothing about the place had decayed the way stone decays. It had been buried deliberately while it was still whole. Someone had not let this ruin fall. Someone had pulled the ground up over the top of it like a blanket drawn over a body that was not quite dead. He followed Reese's tracks deeper, and as he went, the structures started to rise out of the ground around him. Low walls at first, then higher ones, then shapes he did not have words for, so he drew them instead. And the search team who recovered the book said the drawings were the worst part, because they were precise and careful, and they did not match anything anyone had ever seen. Doorways that led into solid rock, stairs that went down into the hillside and did not come back up, and everywhere, cut into the stone, the same mark over and over, a mark he drew 19 times across those pages, and never once described in words. On the 6th page, his handwriting changes. It gets larger, faster. He wrote that he had found Reese, or what was left of where Reese had been. He did not describe a body. He was careful about that even then, even coming apart. He wrote that Reese's tracks led to the top of a set of those descending stairs, and stopped, not turned around, not scattered. Stopped at the edge of the dark like the man had walked down into the hill and the hill had simply kept him. Reese's hat was there, his pack was there, his tracks were there, and then there was the opening in the ground, and the stairs going down, and no tracks at all coming back. Whitfield wrote one line under that. He went down. I can hear him. He is still going down. This is the point where the county story and the county silence split apart, because the official report says Ranger Cole Whitfield became disoriented, suffered exposure, and was recovered 19 hours later in a confused state, remembering nothing. That is the version that exists on paper. That is the version that closes the file. But the field book was found 40 feet up a tree. Think about that for a second. A search team 3 days later, walking that same ridge, found no wall, found no doorway, found no ruin, no rows of trees, no floor under the leaves. They found none of it, because when they went back, it was not there. What they found was Cole Whitfield's field book wedged into the fork of a tree 40 feet off the ground, on a trunk with no branches low enough to climb, in a place a man could not have reached with a ladder, let alone with his bare hands and his mind coming apart. The county has never explained the tree. In the official file, there is a single line about the field book being recovered in a wooded area and no mention at all of how far off the ground it was. The two men who actually pulled it down from that fork have both since left the department, and neither of them will talk about it on the record. One of them later told a reporter only that reaching the book needed climbing gear. The book was up where the radio would have carried. That is the only theory anyone has ever offered that makes any sense at all. That in the last clear moment he had, Whitfield understood he was not getting out, understood the ground itself was the thing that had taken Reese, and did the one thing that might get the truth above the dirt and the stone and whatever was under them. He climbed, as high as he could go, and he left the book where the trees could hold it up toward the sky. And now we come to the 11 words, the last transmission. The thing he radioed in before the signal died for good. Dispatch has it time-stamped at 4:17 in the afternoon. His voice on the recording is flat and slow and certain, and he says, "It isn't ruins. It was never ruins. We are living on the roof." Then static. 19 hours of it. Here is what the Tartaria question actually asks, and here is why this story matters more than one missing ranger and one missing hunter. The official history of this continent is a couple hundred years long. Everything before that is called wilderness, empty, unbuilt, waiting for people who had not arrived yet. But the ground keeps saying something different. Cut stone where there should be none. Foundations under forests. Straight walls and squared corners and worked rock, older than the story allows, spread across country the maps swear was never touched. Go looking for it, and you find the same shape everywhere. A survey line that runs clean up to the edge of a hollow and picks up again on the far side, with a blank space in between and nothing named in it. A settlement counted in one census and simply gone from the next. No fire, no plague, no forwarding address. An old plat map with a rectangle of dressed stone marked plainly, and then, in a later and different ink, crossed out and relabelled as a natural rock formation. The corrections are always in a different hand, and the correction is always the same one, told over and over across 200 years and 1,000 miles of quietly buried country. The comfortable answer is that these are homesteads, cabins, the ordinary leavings of ordinary people, and that men like Whitfield get lost and cold and see shapes in the dark that are not there. Maybe that is true. Maybe a good man walked too far, got too tired and wrote a nightmare into a book. Before he climbed a tree he does not remember climbing. But Martin Reese never came home. His truck sat at that trailhead until the county towed it. His rifle was recovered exactly where Whitfield said he left it, straps snapped clean, in a stretch of forest where the search team swore there was no wall and no door. And Cole Whitfield never worked another day in those hills. He left the county, left the state, and the one time a writer tracked him down and asked what he saw up on that ridge, he said only this. He said the maps are not wrong because they are old. They are wrong because someone corrected them. And then he closed the door. We are living on the roof. That is what he radioed in. Not a cry for help, not a location, a conclusion. The words of a man who had just understood that the wilderness was never wilderness, that the ground under all of it was built, and that the forest we walk through every day is not the beginning of the story. It is the part that grew over the end of it. That is the sentence that ends careers, if you say it out loud, in the wrong room. Not that a hunter and a ranger went missing in rough country. That happens. But that the country itself is the cover. That the wilderness was always the disguise. That every empty stretch of forest on the map might be empty for a reason, and the reason might be looking back up at you through the leaves. Martin Reese went down the stairs. Cole Whitfield climbed the tree. One of them was trying to reach the bottom of it. The other was trying to warn the top. And the ridge is still there, unmarked, on a stretch of Ozark country the locals have a name for, but will not write down. Nobody has surveyed that shelf of stone since. Nobody wants to. If you want to see the fieldbook pages laid out in full, the drawings included, the 19 marks, the exact lines, in the order he wrote them, along with the dispatch timestamps and the survey maps that were quietly pulled, it is all in the document linked below. Read it once with the lights on. Then decide for yourself what Cole Whitfield actually found up on that ridge, and ask yourself the question he could not stop asking. If the wilderness was built, and the maps were corrected, and the ground under your feet is the roof of something far older than the whole story you were taught, then who took the trouble to grow a forest over it? And what were they trying so hard to keep down there in the dark?